So the goal is to talk about the benefits of this system and address possible challenges that we have, and also what can we do to make this BRT more effective. So the idea is, if I want to get to work, I should be able to know कि भाई सबसे करीबी station क्या पड़ेगा, for example, या can I ever take the bus to work or bus home at any stage. So with that, I would just like to thank you all for coming, and thank you to T2F for arranging this talk for us. I am Sumayya Zaidi. I will be moderating this talk, and I'm also a member of the Public Interest Law Association, which is why I was contacted by Marvi, because we do work with environmental rights, basically protection and promotion of constitutional rights within the Pakistani framework. So, and our president, Mr. Saad Amanullah, is here today, so if anyone has any questions in that regard, that would be great. I would like to introduce the panelists. First, we have Mr. Arif Balgomi. He is a very popular face in green transportation. He is seen riding his critical mass group, and he's an architect by profession. So what we are looking for from him in this talk is that he would be providing us an urban planning perspective of this of the BRT. Next, we have Mr. Roland D'Souza, who is also another one of our green faces, so to speak. And he is an engineer by profession, but he's been working in environment through the IUCN. He's been working in civil political rights in terms of advocacy, etc., with the HRCP. And also, he's one of the faces of SHERI, which is an environmental advocacy group. Next, we have Mr. Rafiul Haq. He is an ecologist, and he's a member of the Horticulture Society of Pakistan, which is why I got to know him. There are other members of the HSP who are also available for any conversation on how we can actually work towards making the city greener. He is one of the founding members of this alliance called CRAB, the Coastal Restoration Alliance for Biodiversity, and a member of the IUCN as well. And we finally have Mr. Sohail Ahmed Kalodo, who is a conservationist and a member of the advisory committee, which was set up under the Sindh Cultural and Preservation, Heritage and Preservation Act of '94. He generally works to protect the architectural and archaeological historical framework within Sindh. So with that, I would like to welcome the panelists. I think those are your designated spots. Thank you so much. So generally, we have a couple of presentations. I mean, this is an information sharing exercise. So you might feel fairly inundated at times with the kind of data that we're going to be discussing. But the point is for us to get this dialogue going. So we have generally, can I get the next slide? So the BRT system is basically part of a larger transport plan, improvement plan. And it's a vision of Karachi in 2030. It comprises of using this is a JICA study, and it comprises of using the existing KCR, adding 2 MRT lines, mass transit, and 6 bus rapid transits. The focus of today's talk is going to be on the bus rapid transit system. It actually exists of 6 separate lines. So we have orange, green, red, aqua, purple, and yellow. So these are the 6 lines that might one day be able to get you to work or to a friend's place or back home. Can I get the next slide? Okay. This is just in terms of population projection for the city. How are we going to, if you press the next button, so it's an interactive, yeah. So in 2010, this JICA study predicted our population at 18.9 million, right? And if you have, within 10 years, you have an almost increase of 9 million, if you press the next, yeah? Of almost 9 million people in a decade are increasing, and it's going to be 4 million for 2030, which will be further increased. So this is the kind of projection where, in terms of the population that is being discussed for the BRT. Next slide. This is something that I will also ask Arif Saab to start talking. So the idea is these are going to be very interactive, fairly informal. This is how Karachi looks like right now. If you press one more, yeah. This is the central, and one more. So this is how the city is expanding, or has been expanding, and how they expect by 2030 how large Karachi is actually going to be. For the next slide. This is generally your map. There are two maps that I'm relying upon. Also, in the course of research that I've been doing for this project for the last month, there's a lot of discrepancy in terms of material. So for example, one website says that, and all of them are reputable sources, so there's a lot of conflict and also the data that we're getting. So these 6 lines, they give you the cost and the length. If I add all of these costs, it comes to about 35 billion rupees. This is something that I will ask Roland Saab to also elaborate upon. And can I get the next? This is generally the BRT and MRT routes, how they go. So from here on, I would like to ask Arif Saab to tell us about the expansion of the city in terms and the general urban landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the city's been growing very rapidly, that's for sure. I mean, the numbers you've shown indicate the trend that has already been seen. For example, in 1998, when we had our last census, Karachi's population was around 9 point some million. And today, if your projection says 15.1 million, that means we've grown quite a bit. Other projections that I've seen is that the city has grown something like 80% in the last 10 years. Okay, so literally it's doubled. Okay, so that's so the city's been growing very rapidly, and I think the thing that we've seen is that the growth has been further afield, you know, rather than densifying the center, there's been a greater movement outwards to Sujani Town, North Nazimabad, Bin Qasim Town, and outward. But there are problems associated with that, which is that there is no mass transit. So people end up getting plots allotted to them. They go out into the boonies of the city and they find that there's no way to get back in. You know, a lot of people have daily transportation problems. And not only that, they'll find that that they've created these colonies out far away from the center of the city, but they haven't provided the facilities, they haven't provided the amenities, so their schools are not there, jobs are not there. So the tendency is then to come back into the city. So a lot of people have, in recent years, gone out, found that it doesn't work for them. It's too expensive to either commute back in on the private bus system, and then they'll move. So they'll abandon their plot or whatever, or sell it and come back into town. And what we have seen as a result of that is the densification of the inner city communities, colonies like Punjab colony, Delhi colony, Neelam colony, and this is all illegal construction. You know, you're seeing where you had maybe a single or a double-story building, suddenly it's grown 4 stories more, 8 stories more, and it's literally 1 room, 1 bathroom, and a staircase, stacked like pancakes, and probably all on very shallow foundations. So, and nobody monitors this. So this is a really dangerous situation that we're getting into, because we're densifying the city on a very ad hoc basis. And part of it is being part of it is being generated by the lack of mass transit. So this is a condition that needs to be addressed. Now, so anyway, that's in a nutshell what I think has been driving the growth in the city. So.
Okay, thank you. Roland Saab, can you just explain to us, like, I can see that there are all of these costs that are attached to this. For example, the green line is apparently, in some sources, it's 22 kilometers, others say it's 24.4. Regardless, I mean, if that is costing a particular amount that they have stated, are those the only costs that would be involved?
The numbers shown on the chart are estimates made by people, and they are basically what is called infrastructure costs. Now, the infrastructure is the making of a dedicated line for the BRT, okay, and things like the stations, the bridges, but they do not include the cost of the rolling stock. That means the bus costs are not included in this, because the number of buses can vary depending on the amount of people that are available to travel. So these costs are only of the infrastructure. You have the stations, you have the ticketing systems, you have the elevators, all the stuff that is hard and immovable, as it's called. The reason why a lot of these costs are different, there are indices which describe the cost per kilometer, is it depends on whether you're going to go up and go on an elevated section, or you're going to go underground and go through a underpass. If you can get place on a road itself, your costs are going to be low. It is when you need to go above. For instance, if you go to Lahore, Lahore has a lot of elevated track for the BRT. Okay. Also, it depends on what sort of planning you have in the city. We are not able to change a lot of stuff because we are not aware of what there is in the city. For instance, in Karachi, there have been a lot of high voltage lines laid in the middle of the city. Now, these tracks are running in the middle of the city. And in certain areas, they cannot relocate these high voltage lines in order to put the bus tracks. So the costs vary. Now, who is paying for these costs? These costs are paid for essentially by the government through loans. They could be paid by the provincial government, they could be paid by the city government, they could be paid by the federal government. There is even a rumor floating around that a developer is going to be paying for one of the lines. But I understand that that is not really true. A lot of benefit will accrue to him because he is putting up a project which is far out of the city. And although the people who are going to live there are probably not going to use the BRT, but the people who serve there, the cooks, the gardeners, chowkidars, other people like that, since that housing scheme has not provided for this category of people, they've got to come in from somewhere else. And it's going to be very difficult for them to set up a Kachi Abadi in that area. So you require a system. Now, since this particular developer, who shall remain unnamed, is very well in with the provincial government, eventually you'll probably find that the government itself is picking up most of the cost.
Thank you. Can I get the next slide? So at Roland Saab, while I was having multiple conversations with all the panelists, I think I spent a lot of time with them, bothering them on the phone. His recommendation to me was to provide, okay, if we're talking about Karachi's bus rapid transport system, what happens with the other BRTs around the world? So we selected, I was able to have this ratio of fares to operating costs. So how much is it on a city-by-city basis? The one that Roland Saab shared with me was, I think, around 10, 15 cities, and I picked like a few of the bigger cities. Would you like to elaborate on this slide?
Now, if you look at the city of Karachi, let's look at the transport systems here. For instance, you take a rickshaw. What do you think is the ratio of the fare to the operating costs? Anybody have any idea? 30%. The money, no, it can't be 30% because then the rickshaw driver is taking out money from his pocket, the other 70% and subsidizing his thing. He's not making a profit on it. So he's got to operate at least 120% or 150% so that his costs are 100 and his profit is 50. Now all transport systems that operate in Karachi, whether they are Ghoda Gadis or whether they are rickshaws or whether they're taxis or whether they are buses, are all recovering more money than they spend. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it. All right? But this is not the way transport systems work in the world. Especially in urban areas, in densified urban areas, it is of advantage to everybody that the transport systems are subsidized. And this chart, which has been taken from Wikipedia, you can get a much larger list, shows what is the ratio of what people earn from the tickets and what they actually spend. Now, when they spend, there are two parts to the spending. One is the recovery of the capital cost. The other is the fuel and manning cost, personnel cost. You will be surprised to see here that Hong Kong is actually making 186%. They're running it like the taxi drivers and the rickshaw drivers of Karachi. They're actually making more money than they spend. Now you'll say, how is it possible for them to do 186% when Berlin is doing 70%, Chicago is doing 43%, New York is doing 51%? Okay? The reason is Hong Kong is very dense, extremely dense, and people cannot afford to keep cars over there. So the fares are higher. Okay? The trains and the buses and whatever comprises their public transport system runs at a very high efficiency. It's used a lot. You will find the transport systems, for instance in Pakistan, if you take the example of PIA. PIA serves not only the Karachi, Islamabad and the Karachi, Lahore routes, but they also go to Gwadar, and they go to Timbuktu. Well, no, Timbuktu is not in Pakistan. But you get the idea, you know. There are places where they don't make a lot of money. And there's a lot of cross-subsidy between the two. Between these areas that make money and others don't. Unfortunately, people who come in on the private sector, you take Shaheen or you take Air Blue, concentrate on the ones that actually make the money. So if you want to know what makes money in Pakistan, it is the routes that Air Blue and Shaheen and private airlines fly. PIA has got to serve other areas. Public transport systems in cities work the same way. They've got to serve everybody. That is why if you go into big cities like New York and if you go into Europe, you will find a lot of their buses running at half empty. Whereas if you go into Sadr, you will find that the guy is not going to move until he's got his bus full, right? He's got to make it work. Now, unfortunately, this is not the way it's got to do. It's not got to operate. You have got to subsidize the price. New York, Chicago, the city wouldn't work unless the city was putting money into the public transport systems. And this is something that we have not learnt in Karachi. We have not learnt this in Karachi because everything we do here has got to be profitable, and therefore we have miserable transport systems. I'll develop this a little further later.
We can keep it at the end. Yeah. Can I get the next slide, please? This again, again with Roland Saab, just to say that I looked at the TfL website, the Transport for London, and it was a really easy to use and very friendly website. I was able to access a lot of information. What I found interesting was that they have a bus engineering team, and it has to have an audit of all of its transportation, like all of its buses, every 3 months. Right? At the end of the year, they do an analysis of how many more buses are required to keep up with the increase in population. So over 50% of the residents of London, they use bus or the tram that they have. But in 2016, they had over 9,000 buses. So I ask you, like, how many people live in London? And you will be surprised that it's just about 8.4 million people are being serviced by over 9,000 buses, and this is just buses. They have the underground, they have they call it the tube. They have an entire network which connects people. So if we look at and if we have the next slide, which will clarify again what Roland Saab is going to elaborate for the funding. If you could just discuss the subsidies and the various ways of the funds are being used in London.
Let me tell you something that I became aware of about 2 or 3 years ago. In the 1930s and 40s, there were a number of tram systems and bus systems and train systems operating in cities of America and between cities. That is when the automobile really began to pick up. And how did it do that? There was a company formed by Firestone, who makes tires, by Exxon, who provides petrol, and General Motors, who makes cars. They formed a company and they bought up these public transit systems. And after they had bought them up, they shut them down.
This was acknowledged by Congress in the 70s.
In many cities all over America, they closed it down to promote the use of the motor car. Now, we've had a similar experience in Pakistan, where because it's much cheaper to transport stuff on the railway, the Pakistan government didn't shut down the railway, but they put up trucks, a trucking company called NLC, who has virtually taken over the trucking of goods around Pakistan. One, at a much higher cost. Two, with pollution and with congestion on all the roads and trucks and highways. Karachi is particularly affected by this because we have the port and all of these go through the city. So, the costs of things depends on who is making a buck. Okay? I was telling you about cross subsidies. In America, most public transport systems work on a fare ratio of between 20 and 50%. The best one is probably 75%. But they have tremendous advantages from it. One is because now people can, for instance, my sister lives in New York and doesn't own a car. She can come down from where she lives, sit in a bus or sit in a underground and just go wherever she wants. The amount of benefit the city gets from that, the economic benefits from a good transport system is what allows the city to actually underwrite the cost of these systems. Now, we were talking about fair income. There is a relationship between all transport systems and various other economic factors in the city. For instance, all these routes that you have seen of the BRT in Karachi, if you go around and find out what is the cost of property today on those routes and compare them to the cost of property there 10 years ago, okay, you'll find out that there has been a great leap in this. Because transport defines the cost of property. If you live in a city like Chicago or you live in a city like New York, how far you are from the underground defines what is the rent that you have got to pay. Right? So you can see, just like we understand that Nawaz Sharif got the Lahore-Islamabad motorway moved from its original route to go through areas that benefited people from his party or perhaps he himself. It is because good transportation benefits people, okay? Benefits businesses, benefits housing, benefits developers. Developer I just told you about. Okay?
Can you also tell us about, now that you've mentioned the Islamabad and Lahore BRT system, what I want to know is in terms of the subsidies that they are currently working on, what is our expected return on investment? How much will I pay to get from here to, say, Sadr? In terms of...
The fare that has been set in Islamabad is 20 rupees per trip. I understand that the cost to the government is 40 rupees per trip. So there's a 50% subsidy over there. Now that subsidy is being paid for by the PML government. Well, of course, he doesn't pay for anything himself. But what I mean is being paid for, or being paid, sorry, not paid for, paid by the PML government. And there is a real fear that should the government be replaced by somebody else, that subsidy may not continue. This is one of the problems of projects and efforts in Pakistan, is that things are tied to political parties. The BRT that we are working on right now was actually coming about in 2008. The Asian Development Bank was loaning Pakistan $800 million to set up this thing, and the city government was handling the project. They had gone far ahead with the planning. They had a good transport engineering bureau. And then in 2008, the PPP government came into power in the province. And when they came in, they found out that they weren't getting a slice of this cake. They weren't getting the credit for it, and they weren't getting any money that might be skimmed off the top. So they put a stop to the project and said the provincial government will handle it. And this fight went on for about 6 months until at last ADB said, look, you guys keep fighting among yourselves. We are not going to get involved in this. We are taking our money away and we are not going to sponsor this project. So in 2008, before Lahore put in its BRT, Karachi would have had at least one line of a BRT if we hadn't got into this political problem.
Right. Can I have the next slide? This is again a similar narrative from New York, like just to continue. Again, the population is just a bit over 8 million people, and the buses, these over 5,500 buses, actually are able to run 776 million trips per year. So if you do just some very basic math by just divide, because I'm really, really bad at math, but if I just divide the 776 with 8, it comes to about 97 trips annually. So every person in New York is taking these 97 trips, and we are 3 times the population. So maybe our network should be we need at least 20,000 buses to be able to connect everybody, the load that is expected on our system. Can I have the next slide? Again, this map, I'm just going to keep this in the background now just so you have a visual idea of how this is going. Everything kind of aligns in the center there where Numaish is. All of these lines are their centralized focus is going to be in Numaish. And what I want to then ask one of the panelists is that how are we going to manage this? Because what I understand is that the yellow line, if you look, it's like Government of Sindh public and private partnership model. The red line is under discussion with the ADP, which, by the way, ADP is in the country right now, and they're discussing all our BRT systems. Then we have the blue line, which is not part of the BRT, it's part of the MRT, but that is the private developer. We have the green line, which is federally funded. We have the orange line, which will be executed by Sindh, which probably means we'll be providing the funds for it. And so just generally, if we look at just where the money is coming from so many sources. And this is an open question to whichever panelist would like to answer it, that if there are so many people, I mean, it's too many cooks spoiling the broth kind of and also this is just the funding. When you talk about the consultants, people who are doing, who would like to?
From what I understand about this thing, at the moment, I don't believe that there is any central authority that will be like the, MTA in New York or whatever. It looks to me, from what I've read, that these are all going to be independent lines, basically planned and constructed by different people, funded by different people, and probably operating independently, which is not the best thing for a citizen. Because if you were traveling on the green line and you need to make a transfer over onto the yellow line, then you probably are not going to get a single fare for the thing. You will actually have to get off and get on something else. You might also not have schedules that are synchronized, so that when a train comes in or a bus comes into a certain terminal, then connecting trains or buses are timed to leave within a few minutes of each arrival. So now if that doesn't happen, then you're at the mercy of each independent schedule. So that part, I think, is still unclear, and I don't think anybody has a clue how this thing's going to be run. Because clearly nobody has the experience of running a large metropolitan transportation network. And that part worries me. The other thing that I find odd about the way these alignments have been made is that I suspect, and I think I need somebody to correct me or confirm for me what I'm saying. I suspect that the growth of the city is not reflected in this network. Okay, I'll tell you why I say that. Because originally, we had a central business district, which was Sadar. Everybody came to work here. Today, I'll be willing to bet you that the large number of people who are going to use mass transportation don't come into Sadar. I know a lot of people do come into Sadar. It's still so-called the Sadar Bazaar, and a lot of people do come in. But I don't believe it warrants every line to come in and into Numaish. At least this is my opinion. The reason is that when we've done work in areas, we did some work in North Karachi, and we did some work in Gulshan-e Memar as well. And the sort of the analysis that we did was that most people live close to where they work. Okay, so for example, people in Kurangi industrial area, a lot of the people are coming from Kurangi itself to work. You will find very few people coming from, say, North Karachi who have jobs in Kurangi. Okay, so the commute is fairly localized. We found that a lot of the people who are working in, say, the North Karachi industrial area, around Federal Bay area, were coming in from that North Karachi, Sujani area. Okay, so my feeling is that there is going to be a lot more mass transit this way. And yes, you do need lines coming to the center, and I suspect, bringing everything to Numaish and then concentrating down MA Jinnah Road and terminating on Tower doesn't make sense to me. I mean, there is no space for a terminus at Tower. It seems to be, asking for a serious amount of congestion in a historically sensitive neighborhood. That's your, from a heritage point of view, that is your, that's your main area. So I suspect that some of these lines may not be as effective in their utility as one would expect. That's, I'd be curious to hear what anybody has to say about this.
Now that you've brought the heritage point, then I would like, Suhail Sam, could you please tell us, I can put on your presentation right now if you like, would you tell us what are the general landmarks that are possibly at threat, or how, and are they even under threat? Are there any ways that threat can be mitigated to make this system more effective?
Yeah, thanks, Sumia. Actually, in terms of the historic perspective, as Belgrami Saab said, you see, 1843 is the time when Charles Napier, they conquered Sindh. At that time, Hyderabad was the capital of Sindh, the Talpurs and all those people. So obviously, the British, they wanted, to utilize the port city, Karachi as a port city. So obviously, their plan started like, putting infrastructure. And where they actually started from was, from the port, the tower. Yeah, so like, a lot of ships used to come and sail there, and sailors coming in and, just doing their bits. And so, the Meriwether Tower, they, constructed Meriwether Tower, which is now part of this financial central district. So Meriwether Tower was like a landmark, or you can say a city center. Unfortunately, we don't have any much city centers like we have in rest of the world, like Trafalgar Square and Piccadilly Circus. And we ideally want, as Belgrami Saab said, that the Meriwether Tower, where it is situated, we would like that place to be, to be turned into a city square.
Okay.
We can control this area, and we have events like 14th August and all that. We can just suspend the traffic, for example, and people come and spend day. Maybe we could do some landscaping or streetscaping, with the architects. Well, that's a wish list. Yeah, I mean, going back to your question, you see, Karachi is a very important city and a very historical city. When British came in here, I mean, as Bilgrami Saab said, now what we see is there isn't much planning going on. Yeah, it's like, you know, wherever you just see, okay, here's the money, and you start building without any doing town planning and all that sort of things. But British, you know, the colonial time, they did invest time and, you know, put a lot of efforts. And, you know, you could still see so many roads, like say, you know, like a Napier Road and I.A. Chandriga Road. And obviously, you know, we renamed them, but they were there. So what basically, you know, they started doing at that time, like, you know, when they came to Karachi, was they start like building from that Meriwether Tower and going further towards, you know, that Amajana Road, what we have, from that direction. And then on the other side towards the Clifton, you know, where you have Abdullah Shah Ghazi.
Yeah.
It was like there and on that side. And then, you know, they stretched on the other side towards the Nishta Road and Garden and that kind of thing. So basically the way they, you know, divided the area was they called quarters. Like, you know, for example, you know, where we have this Meriwether Tower, it is a railway quarter, for example. And then you have Sarai quarters and different quarters. It is like a small district, you know, you can say. Like you have a postcode in London, for example, AC is like southeast. So similarly, you know, they subdivided in different quarters, like Sadar Bazaar quarters and Soldier Bazaar and all that kind of thing. Going back from the perspective of the Heritage Committee, I mean, in 1994, we had a legislation, you know, passed by the Assembly, which is called that Sindh Cultural Heritage Act, 1994. You know, and what actually they did was the government of Sindh basically started doing some surveys, and you know, with the help of Madam Lari and all those people. So, you know, they started cataloging, you know, these historic buildings, and you know, so compiled a record. And so that started in 1994, and then the recent one, you know, what we did was we reviewed, you know, that list, and in 2011, I think we added more, sort of a 2,100 more buildings. So I mean, I don't have the exact number, but that is like more sort of about 4,000 buildings, you know, that you know, come under the umbrella of that heritage. Now, where, you know, the green line is basically, that is starting from the Numaish, or, you know, that the Amajana Road, and then that is further going towards the tower side of the thing. Now, this is where, you know, most of these heritage buildings are actually, and, you know, the old part of the city. So, I mean, obviously, you know, I've heard, you know, your comments and all the input. Now, I don't see that heritage, you know, committee part anywhere in this whole discussion. And it is a law. It is not just like my thing that, you know, I have to implement it. No, there is a law there, which says that, you know, anything you have to do with the heritage property, you have to take permission. Yeah. And there is a committee. I'm part of that committee, member of that committee. And so, yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, you know, no one has come to, I mean, to our committee, and you know, they have to take some what you call approval. It has to be approved, you know, by the committee, and so that is one of the things, you know, maybe we can sort of highlight.
Could you elaborate? What is the distance that this bus, proposed bus, or any kind of transport has to be from the facade of the building, which is a heritage?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, it has to be, I think, 200 feet. 200
feet.
Yeah, within that vicinity, if you are constructing or doing something, you have to sort of, you know, keep that, your construction away 200 feet at least. But having said that, I mean, I don't know, I mean, because that line has to go across that Amijana Road
Yeah.
and, you know, in the middle of the road. And the photographs which I have seen on the websites and all that, you know, the presentations, they give a very, you know, very encouraging look. They try to give you an encouraging look, whereas in reality, you know, the situation is different. It's like, you know, the parking things, the congestion is there, illegal parking is there, you know, and you know, I was reading somewhere that, you know, every day in Karachi, we are registering about 1,000 motorcycles a day, which is like
940
yeah,
odd
something like that, yeah.
numbers of vehicles, out of which I think it was what, 70 or 80% of it comprises of motorcycles on a daily basis that's being added. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you can imagine that obviously if somebody is, you know, using that bike, he has to stop somewhere. And so I mean, this plan, I would be like, you know, more interested to hear from maybe Programi Saab if they have any, like, you know, dedicated parking plazas or spaces they have to do, or you know, so yeah, I mean.
That is also one of the questions that well, I had imagined that they would come across fairly later on in the talk, but we can address it. Yeah. Okay.
I'm not very fluent with the heritage law, but I have read it, and I think one of the things it says is that the immediate vicinity of any heritage structure is also considered to be part of the heritage. Yeah. So to come in, I mean, I think just recently there was this challenge placed on against the construction of that pedestrian bridge in front of DJ Science College for the very same reason that, you know, it's not just the building, it's the vicinity of that area as well, and that you have to preserve the environs of the, so you know, you can't just, I mean, we've already trashed Jahangir Kothari Parade for that matter, but, you know, let that be a, you know,
a lesson?
sort of a learning experience. But the fact is that any construction that alters the environment within which the heritage structure stands needs to be reviewed and has to be done sensitively, if at all. Okay? I mean, I know that Arif Hassan has been involved with this project for a very long time, and he's been advising and recommending things, and he's for a long time opposed the construction of an elevated mass transit structure through Amijana Road for the very simple reason that it would completely destroy any heritage that's there, because it will obscure it. Because Amijana Road, after a certain point, becomes fairly narrow, especially in the area where we have most of the heritage buildings, which is, you know, from Denso Hall onwards. Yeah, and actually from about Radio Pakistan onward, right? And that's, you know, once you put up a frame structure, you're not going to be able to see the facades. Okay? Not to mention that in narrow corridors, when you have that sort of structure, it becomes very difficult for any emergency services to access those buildings. Okay? Because if there's not enough room, God forbid there's a fire in one of the buildings, you won't be able to have enough room to place a ladder. Okay, these are issues that will come up if you start. Okay, I bring this up because we had raised these issues when an elevated expressway was being proposed for Shara Faisal. Okay, and it was, I mean, this is much more extreme. So an elevated BRT line running down Amijana Road, as far as I'm concerned, is a non-starter. I mean, it should be opposed completely, out of hand. I have seen some fairly compelling presentations. There was one proposal given last year by an organization called ITDP, Institute for Traffic Policy and Development, something like that. And they had proposed an on-ground BRT line running down Amijana Road. And because there's not enough room for traffic, vehicular traffic, and mass transit, they had proposed that Emma Road then be pedestrianized.
Yeah.
That only mass transit access be given, and the rest of it be reduced to a pedestrian. And that looked, the renderings were quite compelling. And I would think that would transform Emma Road for the better if you could do that, because then you would really get an opportunity to enjoy that area. And right now you can't. You can hardly see anything because the buses and the noise and if you kind of clean it up, your BRT bus comes, brings people in and out, and the rest is for pedestrians. It would really revive that space. I think right now the southern area is oversubscribed in terms of its uses, because a lot of your wholesale markets are there. Put a lot of pressure on people coming in to buy stuff that really doesn't need to be there. I mean, maybe you need to move your wholesale markets out.
Yeah.
If you move the wholesale markets out, then what it does is it opens up real estate for perhaps more like offices and stuff. Gives you an opportunity to fix up those buildings for fix up the buildings for office rental and so on. Because some of the buildings, if you go and survey, you'll find that you have a shop downstairs and the rest of the building is being used for warehousing. Okay, especially if you go into places like Jodia Bazaar and so on, there's a lot of that. So that's as far as the heritage. I think that I believe that we've got to be very careful, and we have to understand that right now you've got wholesale markets. Tomorrow, let's say there's a move to move the wholesale market out, the demographics and the population movement and the commuter numbers
That
completely
changes.
change. You may not have the same kind of traffic loads coming in, and you've got all of your lines concentrating down Emma Road. So you may find that you've got this multicolored white elephant, that's not just producing enough ridership.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'd like to say something about motorbikes. Okay, I think motorbikes are the present and future of our cities, and I think very much so all across Asia. I mean, if you look at any of the, like Bangkok, for example, swarming with people in motorbikes. The reason is that the motorbike has become so cheap. It's become so cheap that, we run an advocacy organization for bicycles. I can't even tell somebody to go and buy a bike because he says, why would I buy a bike? For a few thousand more, I can buy a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And a motorbike, nowadays, yesterday somebody was telling me 35,000 gets you a brand new motorbike. And 35,000 with 0% financing. So literally you can...
And the petrol consumption as well
Yeah. So people want to be mobile. And one of the ways that you're going to make these projects successful is if you make it, one, very attractive to people so that they don't ride their motorbikes, okay? Or you make it really difficult for them so that they can't ride their motorbikes. Okay?
Taxes.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. If you go to London, the city of London, the financial district, you have to pay to get into that with your car.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to pay. I think I remember some years back, my brother who was living in London said it costs £800 per year to get the permit to be able to drive into work if you work in the city. They don't provide parking. You're not required by the building bylaws to provide off-street parking for cars. So, for example, the tallest building in Europe happens to be in the city of London, which is the Shard, and it has maybe a dozen parking spaces for emergency vehicles and for deliveries and for handicapped people. Other than that, there's no requirement for parking. So that means you're compelled to take public transportation, because you know that if you drove in, you would have to pay an astronomical amount of money, not only to get in but for parking and so on. So to some degree, you are going to have to create this culture of discouraging people from using their own vehicle. Otherwise, this thing's going to be the way it's in Dubai. Very few people use the train in Dubai simply because it's a lot easier to drive. So that's where the real competition is going to come in with the motorbike. And right now, I don't see the motorbike losing.
Okay.
So that's the equation that needs to be figured out.
Just generally, I would, this conversation about parking is just reminded me, with PILAP, we've been going to meetings with the with the traffic department and the management of how does traffic actually work. And this center where we look at Numaish and all of these areas, it's interesting. If you look at Zebun-Nisa Street, actually Zebun-Nisa Street ke bilkul niche, building ke niche, there are levels for parking. Those levels for parking, the entrances have been blocked by street vendors, and the inside is being used as storage and warehouse. So there are even when we have parking plaza, there's only one parking plaza, the CDGK one, right by Empress Market, right opposite that. But even where people have, well, fortunately followed the law and allowed for amount of parking space within the buildings, the problem still arises is that it's being not used for that purpose. So it's also about our own unwillingness to use what we have. So now I'd like to speak to Rafi Saab. Rafi Saab, can you please tell us what in this entire BRT system, right, we are looking at, apart from the heritage, जो हमारी गलती से थोड़ी सी environment गलती से कुछ दरख्त हमने छोड़ दिए हैं और billboards के लिए नहीं गिराए, how does the ecological environment actually benefit, suffer, what has to be done?
Thank you very much. First of all, I must thank my colleagues for enriching my knowledge. But to tell you the truth, when we are comparing something with the system which has been running for hundreds of years, and then comparing it with a newborn system, it's unjustifiable. In Britain, they had an opportunity, and that was the blessing of the Second World War. They dug trenches and they use it for underground. Fine. So for that, do we need a world war? No, we don't. Certainly not. So that's one perspective of defining things. And the other thing is, fine, we have parking plaza here. We don't understand the behavioral perspective. In Dubai, the commuters are not opting for a mass transit just because they have a psyche. They want to show off.
Interesting.
That's not the thing. And similarly, we here in this city have a different perspective. If we are promoting individual commutership, we are ultimately contributing to the carbon level of ambient oxygen, ambient atmosphere. And that will ruin everyone. That will ultimately suffocate us, and that will not even spare a single heritage site. We have concrete structures, and these Britishers, these mainlanders in Europe, they learn a lot. They had acid rain. Thank God they didn't have concrete structure. They are wooden structures. But even that got rotten. Imagine if we get a part of it, what will happen to Karachi? So I think BRT or any effort to go for a mass transit would be a nice effort. And I think there are compromises, fine. But the compromises should be considered very rationally. That, okay, what we are talking about, what we are going to lose and what we are going to gain. And in COP21, what has been done by our people, well, they're not prioritizing environment, but how about we the people who are going to pay the price of environmental degradation? None of the people who are in the government would love to live here. They have their bank accounts elsewhere, they have their families elsewhere, they have their children elsewhere. So we, the inhabitants of this city, the country, are going to pay the price. So we have to be very rational in thinking about all these factors. Yes, this KIDCL, that's Karachi Infrastructure Development Company Limited, I had an opportunity of looking at the environmental, the biological segment of this EIA report. And I found something that was very interesting. They studied over a stretch of about 22 kilometers. Rather, initially they studied at 18 kilometers, and they studied some 19,000, they enumerated some 19,000 different life forms of plants.
Wow.
That includes trees, shrubs, and not herbs. Herbs are normally they vanish. So, and they enlisted it. But they divided it laterally in 3 lanes, and of course, the project was supposed to eradicate the median lane, but that was an ideal situation. I understand that there could be some damages on the lateral sides as well, but the documented number was 13,000 some hundred. And the document was very diligently made, and they said, okay, fine. They enlisted all those species were not found on IUCN red list. So that was my way of assessing anything like that. But we have sensitivities, because the trees that what we are talking about, they once they have been sown, it takes time to get them grow. And since I'm representing Horticulture Society, we found there were some segments where some grown-up trees were found, and that was to our institutional knowledge, and we communicated to the project as well.
Would you like to elaborate on the business recorder?
Yeah,
road?
that was about 31 trees of Barna.
Yeah.
And I'm not recalling the botanical name just to confuse you. So Barna is the generic name. And the heritage history was sown by our founder, President, Mr. A.K. Khan. Well, things are not that important if people are still alive. But if one dies, then of course we need each and every bits and pieces of the person that belong to as have been considered as heritage. So we in society, think it's quite sensitive to us.
How can those trees, like we're looking at trying to make this BRT as effective as possible. So if Business Recorder Road with its 32 Barna trees is going to be part of this plan, what are the replanting measures that can be taken?
Yeah, normally the transplant, I'm just coming to the topic because I wonder how many of you are aware of Mera Karachi. That's a Facebook.
Mera Karachi
so
group.
I posted a response to the consultant, and with the name of Rafiul Haq, and it's all about a post that was from Jafar Ali Belgarami. Someone is all telling the telltale that okay, what we have done is about 8 transplant of 8 mature trees, and I've written that okay, it's so naive. On my cell phone, I'm having an alert that okay, this would be a hard time, and be careful not to go in the sun, have a hat, and keep yourself wet, and of course drink as much water as you can. And on the other hand, I'm seeing a post that okay, we did such a nice job in daytime. We dug out a tree and we are going to transplant it. And the consultant compared it is a sort of a very complex surgery. Yes, that's a surgery, but the surgeon is not competent. I mean, it would be so naive that if you need a heart problem and you go to the cosmetic surgeon, because in plant sciences, none of these trees were supposed to be transplanted or shifted whenever they get dormant period, and the dormant period is when they shed leaves. That's the autumn season. And when any of the factory, when we have a surgery, the doctors what they do, they monitor our 5 vital indicators, and if someone is having a hypertension, he's not supposed to undergo the surgery. And doctor get it back and get the person back and then get him back to normal unless. So what's happening here? The first concern was the timing. That those transplants were not at the proper time. And that was to show the people that, okay, we are concerned about the conservation. And that's a cosmetic approach. That's not the real time to do the job. The other one is that the consultant showed that they are going to transplant some 800 trees. What for? 800 trees, again, comes to the exchequer. And that's the additional cost. So I've questioned that, okay, what is the criteria? When we are talking about Hong Kong, I've gone through a protocol that has been developed by the Hong Kong authority while dealing with such conditions. If they have to cut out or remove the trees, what would be the strategy? And they strategize. They evaluate it for the conservation perspective. They evaluate it for the valuable thing. And normally, in such conditions, there are some other options available. And that we call it offsetting. When a project considered it, that there are some massive chopping, they do it, they develop new plantations which would be less costly and at an exponential rate, maybe 5 times or 10 times greater than that. That's the usual practice. But that was not been adopted by the project. So that was our concern, first of all about the timings and the Burner tree that we have, that is a heritage sensitivity to HSP. So that's one aspect, and the way how it has been tackling. Because I've quoted one example that there are certain problems that, my two colleagues are from having an engineering background, and Dr. Saab is having a heritage background. I'm a biologist. So there should be a sort of an integrated approach.
Yeah.
Like I know a couple of laws, but I can't claim myself as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Should I? No. So that's the dilemma that everyone, like I've earlier, before coming to this forum, I'd been there in Gymkhana and telling those people that please do the plantation, but please hire someone or at least get advice from someone to technically guide you what to do and what not to do. People are going and erecting a plant and just leaving it, not watering it. And they claim that, okay, we did a million campaign and we did a billion campaign. And of course, and the result is still dismal. And that is a cost that is going from the exchequer. And the exchequer is nothing but it's the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
So this is the generic concern, and then I would love to respond to any of the questions that is related to this.
Your comment actually reminds me of one of the meetings that I had with another member of the HSP who's here today, Salman Saab. Salman Saab had said that our problem is that we want to go and plant trees. So then we get these little saplings and हम जाके उनको ज़मीन में गाड़ देते हैं और कहते हैं वो देखो मैंने 100 दरख्त लगाए आज या 100 पेड़ लगाए. The probability of those saplings becoming fully grown trees is actually very little. You have to, if you take down one tree, your ratio should be 1:6. That's the best possible ratio. As far as I remember, this EIA for the Green Line, the ratio was 1:3 that they're doing. But if you're planting 6 saplings, the problem with the sapling also is that हम चलते हुए जा रहे हैं, median पे अगर लगा हुआ in the middle of the road, we'll just step on those small little saplings, so they die. Obviously, the idea, it's such a simple solution. आप थोड़ा सा उसको पौधे को बड़ा करें ना. If it's 3.5 feet, then I will not go and walk all over it because it's more than half my size probably. But we need to work towards all of these kinds of things as well. आपने जो ये trees as a heritage के बारे में, so if I make that connection with Sohail Saab, परसों in the Dawn, on the second page, there was a report of the UNESCO permitting, giving approval for the light rail, which was going to go past Shalimar. Could you elaborate on how is it that it can be done there, and is it past the 200 feet?
Yeah, I mean, you see, there are certain monuments in Pakistan which are listed as a World Heritage. That means that, the jurisdiction of UNESCO sort of comes in. Now, the Shalimar Bagh, that's one of the, that World Heritage listed, the sites. And obviously, that metro line was passing through it. And there has been, that demonstrations and all that, people, who are heritage lovers, who, you see, when we say heritage, I have to add here that it is not just the buildings. Heritage has a very vast meaning. Like my colleagues, they said, there are so many things which actually, make your heritage sort of,
It's part of our heritage, like it's our...
Yeah. So, obviously there has been, a lot of, talks going on with that UNESCO people, and eventually, they let them do their bit, but with certain conditions. That's my understanding is from that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what we are having here, in that same perspective, you see, with the lines, this BRT, what we are doing is we are just adding more to our infrastructure. The way I see it from the heritage perspective, okay, we are building new line. I don't know what would be the utility of, this BRT service end of the day. But my personal experience of reading such things is in our country we are very efficient in initiating things and starting things, but ending to that project is another thing. So my main concern again is if we have you see that there are so many stakeholders, as Bagrami Saab and my other colleagues said. You are getting funding for one line for ADB, and then Sindh government is financing another project, and this
Private
green,
developers,
private
etc.,
developer
federal
and green
funding.
line.
Ji.
Yeah, that is, you see, that is the one side of thing. Now, this green line where it is sort of passing from the Emajana Road, that is known as an old town. That's the old part of the city. And it's not just that, there's Emajana Road, you just bulldoze it and just put the lines, and then, the train will start working on it. There is so much going underneath as well. There are utility lines, electricity lines. And I wonder if they have had anybody on board, because somebody, I'm also having a background of engineering, and during my university, they sort of tell you that on this Karachi, the way it has mushroomed and it has grown, there is no actually the blueprints of the, what is, where these lines are going. So what they do is if there any, this sewage line is chalked, what they do is they get, whoever is the oldest, 60, 70-year-old guy, he knows, okay, this is passing from here and here. So they don't actually have those,
Blueprints
the
and
blueprints
documentation.
So after, those people are gone, the senior people are gone, I don't know what's going to be the condition of this city. We have to, sort of think on. And coming back to that heritage aspect, you see, with the infrastructure that we are adding on, what happens is, we are just talking about, the brick and mortar and cement and that kind of thing, but heritage is a very sensitive thing. So those people, they sort of represent or belong to certain communities. You have so many communities living in, as Bagrami Saab said, you have Jodia Bazaar, you have, the cloth market and all that stuff. So with this new infrastructure, what happens is it is going to impact the real estate prices, of those heritage buildings. So obviously, you have access to your heritage property, which you are not able to commute very easily in the past, but now you have this train, just across your door, the prices will go up. And obviously, the people who are living there, as Bagrami Saab said, in vertical spaces, they will sell it eventually, and some builder will buy it and start demolishing the building. So we are, just forgetting this, this impact that is going to leave on the lives of the people. Like, we are very closely because we have this sense of community still as compared to rest of the world. So, that the impact is going to be on those areas. So, yeah, I mean,
Right. So now I would like to move towards the alternatives of how we can make this BRT more effective. Yeah, for sure.
I think I'm going to like to just respond to what Osam said, because I think some of the things that he said are pretty interesting. First of all, when he talks about infrastructure, just tell a short anecdote. Last week I was talking to an engineer, an army engineer, and he said that he was working with the military estate in Karachi cantonment, and somebody called to say that they had discovered a tunnel, and they were worried that this was near Parsi colony, a tunnel, and they thought that it was very mysterious, and this was some years ago. So a very mysterious thing, and it must be a conspiracy or something. So when they went down there and they looked at it, they discovered that it was a British era sewage line, and a very large sized, very well designed. And yeah, this guy, I think he was boring a well or something, and they struck through and they discovered they had entered a tunnel. And so we don't know what's down there. Okay, and apparently what's happening is that as we are building new buildings and putting down foundations and basements and so on, we're destroying this sewage system and whatever that was already there. Nobody probably has drawings of it, because you know what they do with the drawings at KMC. So that's one issue. Now, as far as the heritage part is concerned, I just want to add one thing. One of the things that's never been addressed or had never been tried in this city, and I want to take this opportunity to just throw it out. One of the things that you find in a lot of other cities with heritage neighborhoods that you want to conserve is the ability to trade the air rights of those buildings. Okay, and there are laws permitting that. So that because and we've never tried that in this city from what I know. Basically how it works is that if somebody owns a building or a piece of property, they have the right to develop it. The old Roman law says as far down as you can go till you strike Hades, or as high as you can go until you hit Olympus, or whatever. The idea was that it's your right to build it. Now, when you come in and say, I'm sorry, you have a 3-story building which we consider to be a heritage, you can't touch it, but everybody else around you who doesn't have a heritage building can build a 12-story or 20-story building. Now that guy is going to feel gypped. He's going to feel that he's been cheated out of the value of his property. So the way air rights works is that what you say is, okay, listen, you've got a 3-story building, but if you didn't, you could have a 20-story building. We'll allow you to sell the right to build 17 stories to somebody developing somewhere else. Okay, so if you said, for example here, if you said Emigena Road is a conservation district, and we don't want to destroy that, the character of that space, and you say, instead, II Chandigarh Road we're going to use for high-density, high-rise development, because this is our central business district. So somebody could sell the air rights of their heritage property to somebody building a building on II Chandigarh Road, and that guy could build another 17 stories.
Right.
And that's how it works. I mean, New York was built that way. That's why a lot of the core buildings, like down in Wall Street, the smaller buildings survived and didn't get, destroyed by speculative development early on. And that's something that we need to try, because it's really unfair to tell someone, oh, you lucky guy, your building's been heritage listed,
I'm a poor guy.
In fact, recently I had a friend call up and say, listen, can you find out if my building's heritage listed? And sure enough it was, and he doesn't know what to do. So that's something that I would propose that should be done. And I think the urgency is greater now, because as we start building mass transit routes into these areas, the property values are going to increase, the pressure to demolish and develop is going to increase, and if we want to conserve our heritage districts, we need to try these creative strategies. And I think that transferable development rights, that's what the correct word is, not, you said selling of air rights, but transferable development rights is a strategy that should be considered. And maybe we could talk about that. The other thing, when you talk about what could have been done better, I think I think our government likes to spend our money. Okay, they love big projects. They love projects that are
shiny and new.
Shiny and spend money,
Yeah.
because if you don't spend the money, you can't skim anything. Okay, if I came in and said, listen, I'll do this thing for you for nothing, it'll be peanuts. They'll say, get out. Okay, because they don't want to save money. They want you to spend the money, so that's where the kickbacks come from. All these flyovers that were built around Karachi, the amount of money that was made from just the earth fill for the ramps, astronomical amounts of money. I mean, fortunes were made just dumping earth.
Wow.
Okay, and I don't know about the rest of it, but I know that the earth filling was a pretty lucrative business. So, we go whole hog for these sort of things. The reason I say this is because BRT was developed as a solution for developing countries to develop mass transit economically. Look at London. We've been looking at London. London has a tube system that dates back to the 1800s,
Yeah.
late 19th century, and they put in this whole infrastructure. They were one of the wealthiest economies at the time. They had all of this stuff built in. The tube network was pretty much in by mid 20th century in effect. In spite of that, London needs this enormous network of buses, surface trains to supplement and support the tube network. Now, we could never come up with the funds to put in an underground train system like this. And a lot of cities in the developing world came to the same conclusion. One of the first places to implement successfully a BRT system was Bogota, Colombia, under Enrique Peñalosa.
Yeah.
And he's one of the people who came up with this revelation that, I can't go in and dig all these tunnels, I don't have the money for it. So the idea was...
Sorry, one question. You talking about the underground? Sorry. Want to know the bus stations that are at grade. What happens when they go underground? Like, what are the costs?
It's huge. I mean, you look at New York. New York's putting in a new subway line on 3rd Avenue, I think, on the east side. And they're having a really tough time. It's just taking years and years and years because they can't touch anything. There's just so much infrastructure already there. They have to sort of tread very, very carefully. They have to go deep enough so that if they cut, you have to go under all the infrastructure. In London, the deepest tubes tunnels are so deep because they are running under buildings, and they have to be deep enough so that they don't disrupt the foundation. Okay, so that cost we can never afford out here.
And what if the stations itself, like I remember Golan Saab just mentioned that, what if the stations itself that are at grade level and they look really grand, etc. What if they were, instead of having over pedestrian bridges, what if we go underground and for people to get to the other side of the road? Those passages, how much cheaper are those alternatives to?
They're more expensive, I think. I think building over is cheaper. Now, the genius of BRT is that you are using the existing road network. Yeah. That's what should happen. The way it developed in Bogota and other cities that adopted BRT was that they took the fast lane. Okay, they took the inside lane and made them exclusive for buses. What that did was it reduced the volume of the road, discouraged people to take their own cars. So it created a self-fulfilling successful strategy, right? Because it was harder to drive, because now instead of 3-lane highway roadway, you had a 2-lane roadway, and you said, okay, I might as well take the bus.
Yeah.
What we've done is that we've destroyed the median, and in addition to that, we have added all of this elevated infrastructure, which is cost. What should have happened is that we should have started off with the right side lane. You know, you use that for your BRT, so that way your infrastructure cost is minimized. You only have to build the stations on the median, and you only have to provide for the rolling stock, the buses and so on. Okay. Eventually, when the vehicular volume increases, you could then, if necessary, build an elevated roadway for the buses and then reoccupy the right lane.
Fast lanes.
That would be your phase 2.
Right.
But we haven't done that. We are assuming that we're going to have people use the buses, and the same volume of vehicles will continue to ply the roads. So if the same number of people are out on the road in their motorbikes and cars, then
what's
who's
the
using the
point?
buses?
Yeah, what's the point of the
Okay, so I think that's where this system has its flaws, conceptual flaws. So that's my reservation.
I have a quote, Roland Saab, from one of the newspapers. I think it was Tribune, and you described Karachi, I'll quote, "Karachi is a graveyard of transport projects that have died out. What makes you think this one won't?" So this was with reference to the BRT. What do you think are the areas that we need to address so that we don't repeat the mistakes that were made in the other transport projects?
I think there are two issues with the projects in Karachi or in Pakistan. One is you require a certain level of governance to run projects. And I think our basic problem is that our governance systems are so bad that no matter what you try, it is virtually doomed to failure before you start. Right now, this might sound very pessimistic, but think about all of the things that we do. The graveyard of projects that I talk about is over the last 60 or 70 years, there have been at least 10 transport projects in Karachi. The KTC, the Green Bus, the KRTC, the Sindh Transport, the UTS systems. There are a whole lot of them that have come, started, run for a while, run out of money, run out of subsidy, and closed down. Right? What will make these ones different? The problem in Pakistan is that we do not have plans. We are not able to plan over a long period of time. We can do things that can be done immediately. They are projects. They don't fit into some sort of a scheme, some sort of a strategy so that we are going ahead to solve and address a problem. We are doing this because it brings us political points, it generates money, it generates photo opportunities, and we can actually say that, hey, look, I've built this overpass. I've put in this green bus system, or I've done this, or I've done that. For instance, there has been a lot of political capital out of the BRT in Lahore.
Yeah.
All right? There are a couple of things that I would like to talk about. One is, when we put this up, who will run it? This is the question that we need to do, especially when it is being so badly organized. If you go to New York, would you find that all the lines of the underground system were actually put up by 20 different parties or 30 different parties? How would somebody, as Arif asked earlier, switch from one to another? I'm sure you've traveled on places and you need to switch from one to the other. You buy one ticket that keeps you going within that zone, or goes, whatever it is. If it's not a zone, it's a fare all the way through. You got to. So the ticket machines, the procedures, everything has got to be integrated, which has not been done in this particular case. You might find, for instance, that buses have different levels of the step. And you might find, if you buy your buses from different sources, that you won't be able to stop at the same platform.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is what can happen. It isn't the way other systems are done, but in Karachi, it could possibly be done that way. The second thing is that you require the rule of law for anything to work. And if there's no rule of law, you can't make it work. For instance, if you take a look at traffic and transport in Karachi, if we just had regulated parking, if we just had people obeying the traffic laws, not going through the red light, driving in lanes, making signaling when they turn, keeping the fast traffic on the right, the slow traffic on the left, we could probably get at least 50% more capacity from the existing roads. So the reason our road system in Pakistan, in Karachi and Pakistan doesn't work is that we don't obey the laws. And if you don't obey the law, nothing you put in is going to work. We go around problems. Let me give you an example. From Submarine Chowk into Defense, there is a road, right? That road is clogged up with parking, with telas, with all sorts of encroachments. And as a result, instead of trying to clean up that road and have a road that people can go through into Defense went to the KPT and says, can you build us an overpass? Now this is like having a clogged artery and saying, why don't I do something to control my cholesterol, and why don't I exercise, and why don't I do a lot of other things? And you say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to put a bypass.
Yeah.
Right. These BRT systems are meant to give you a dedicated lane for buses to carry hundreds of people. What you will see happening in Karachi, which doesn't have any rule of law, is that these lanes are going to have people on motorcycles going down the lane, people in cars going down the lane. Okay, so that's going to reduce the utility of the system. BRT systems in other countries use another feature, which is when one of these BRTs, one of these buses approaches an intersection, they actually have the power to change the lights around. The lights are controlled by the bus driver. So instead of having to stop there and wait for the red light, he changes the lights around well in advance and he goes through. So this improves the efficiency of the whole system. But do you think that's going to be possible in Karachi? He comes to this intersection and it doesn't matter whether the light is red or not, there's traffic going to be going across the other way.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've got to understand is that without the rule of law, you cannot have any system work. And if you have the rule of law, the existing systems are going to be able to perform much better and your whole system is going to actually work. If you look at this map, where is Clifton? Where is Defense?
Yeah.
It's below everything. It's out of this map, which means that the BRT system is actually not needed there. And most of the people sitting in this room probably live in these two areas, which means the people who are actually going to benefit from this, who are going to be concerned about it, are not even here listening to this stuff and trying to act on it. Okay? I think it's very, very important. This map was prepared by JICA, Japanese Aid Agency, and they spent a lot of time in Karachi, probably a period of 2 or 3 years, having public meetings. I'm sure that people here didn't attend any of those public meetings because really we weren't interested. Okay? They went out and held public meetings on the roads, like this Green Line road. They're the ones who named all the colors of these roads, by the way. Yeah. There were notices in the papers where on the Green Line road they had meetings in 2 or 3 locations along the roads, public meetings, asking for feedback from the people on how things should be done. Okay? So the problem is actually something that doesn't concern most of the people who make the decisions. Our politicians live in Defense or Clifton. Okay. Our larger bureaucrats live in this thing of Clifton. and they aren't even on this map. If you go to Amsterdam, a lot of people drive around on cycles. Do you know who these people are? They're the millionaires of Amsterdam. They go around on cycles. Okay? If you saw the newspaper yesterday, the Sheikh of Dubai was riding in the underground in London. And I'm sure sitting along with him out there in that same train were a lot of millionaires and perhaps a couple of billionaires. So it is only when the rich, the powerful, the people who actually make the decisions are using the things that are being done that will improve. I know a suggestion that has been made to improve the education system in Pakistan is to make it mandatory that anybody who becomes an MPA, an MNA or a minister must have his children in these public schools of the government. That will improve the standard of schools straight away. Or you will have people not wanting to become MPAs and MNAs. So I think that while the BRT system is needed, we need to get people around. This could improve the city tremendously. We are not planning it properly. We have had experts. The Japanese came in here and did a lot of work. They've been pushed out of this thing. Right? There have been other groups that have been asked to do it. It's all being planned, assigned, created on a political basis. As everything in Pakistan happens, it gets politicized and eventually it doesn't work.
I think we're nearing the end of the talk. Do you have any other statements thoughts that you had? The panelists, I'm asking, are there anything that you would?
Just quickly would like to add, there is a common perception that, if a property is in heritage, that means it's a dead end. That is not entirely true. I would like to just, share my experience with you. You see, when you have to have a building, like, you plan to construct a building, obviously there are certain regulatory authorities you have to go and consult, like SPC and all that. So take, this heritage committee or cultural heritage committee as one of those regulatory bodies. And, there are options available, like, you can reuse your properties and, like, maintaining the heritage bit of it. Yeah, there are ways. There is a concept of adaptive reuse. So very, spreading commonly. So, yeah, that's the one thing I would like to add. Secondly, as Belgrami Saab said, that, okay, it is totally unavoidable, for example, that, for a greater cause of public, common man, you have to put these lines and you have, whatever, for example, in Lahore, if it's a heritage building, you have to, sort of do some compromises, for example. Then we propose, like, in waste, like America and London and other countries, you have, like, carbon credits concept. Like, for example, if there's an industrialist in New York, they are emitting more carbon thing and, damaging the environment. What they do is, like, they buy credits, like in Kenya or some other part of the world, and do better for the environment. So similarly, we may sort of propose something like, okay, if you have a heritage property and there is, like, obviously unavoidable, you cannot save it or something, and some builder want to do something, then they have to buy those credits and safeguard other buildings which are of equal importance, So maybe this way, like, we can sort of keep this awareness open and tell people that there are options available, they can do that, and then contribute on a better, sort of
footing.
Yeah.
Now I would like to ask the audience, are there any questions that you would like our panelists to address? Something that was not covered? Ji.
There were two comments, like Roland mentioned that this, I think, is the 8th or the 10th transport project, so which hasn't worked. So many have failed here in Karachi. So like one you had mentioned of JICA, the study, that had recommended the elimination of all rickshaws. And the minibuses, not the ones we see right now, but in the 80s, the minibuses were the small, high-ace 15-seater ones, because they said they were clogging the roads. And instead of those, you should have bigger buses. So as many people can travel, instead of 3 minibuses, you can have the load in one. And what we ended up doing was giving licenses to more rickshaws. We modified the rickshaws, so we have more rickshaws on the road. And again, now we have as many motorcycles being, given licenses. And so another thing that that happened in Singapore, how they make it prohibitive for people to own their own vehicle is that they make the petrol cost very high, the fuel cost very, very high. So, I mean, it's cheaper to travel in public transport. They also have the odd and even, which now Delhi has adopted recently. Singapore has had that in place for quite a few years, that if your car number plate is even numbered, so you can take it out on one day and the odd number on another day. So that also lessens the congestion. But mainly they discourage through various ways the ownership of vehicles, because that is the only way you can get the public to use the public transport. And I don't think any of those sort of inducements or the carrot and stick are in place. So I don't know how this will work. And as for the offsets, the consultant has said that yes, we will have the offsets. 1 tree, we will plant 5 trees. But 5 or 6, in some places they even said 10. I think that was in the EIA? Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, the country has the law.
Yeah.
It's been implemented in part of Punjab as well, because the forest has been, the forest department has been mandated for, and it's the jurisdiction of the concerned conservator to decide that how valuable it is. But again, I'm just coming back to Roland's statement, and I'm fully supporting this. The governance system is not, in fact, is not in place, and that's one of the root cause of these anomalies. So this is.
So what I wanted to also suggest to the people over here who have been sitting through this entire conversation, and although, like Roland said, none of us are going to be either benefiting or being affected by this, that what we can do is, if the offset is there, they've committed to it, then at least there should be some public civic oversight, that have they planted the trees or have they only committed it in the day, because they are saying कि काम तो नहीं रुक सकता जी, काम तो हो रहा है. But the point is, काम होने के लिए आपने ये एक commitment दी है कि you will plant 10 trees and then cut one. Not that you have cut it and yes, we will plant it. Now who's going to take a look at that? Who's going to monitor that? And then these things, I was just, while this conversation was going on, I had written an article when the BRT in Islamabad was being built, and before that for the Lahore. Who's going to determine the fare when there are so many players? How will there be a uniform fare? And the subsidies are also actually going to run out. They have time bar. They are not forever. So the Lahore price, the 20 rupee ticket, actually at the market price, because that is a loan. We keep saying Turkish hukumat ne tofa diya. No, Turkish hukumat is not an idiot. They do not give tofa. That's a loan and we have to pay back that loan. At the market price, that ticket, to make sense for that project, should have been 200 rupees. The ticket is 20 rupees. Wow. So how is that going to make any kind of economic sense? And what has been worked out over here, do we know? So we are actually, that is not the only thing that we are clueless about, like when Arif started this presentation. I mean, we are clueless about many things that with this project. So civil society needs to at least start asking the right questions, and then also start monitoring the answers that are given, that whether those commitments are going to be kept or not, and if they are not, then some action needs to be taken.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'd just like to add that our government has our people in government have a very good habit of presenting and proposing plans that are just not feasible. You just have to scratch the surface and you see that it falls apart.
I wanted to I was wondering about the Karachi Circular Railway, which is, I see tracks over here, but it hasn't been the focus today. Although I think that the KCR is a much cheaper option. It's circular, it doesn't go into the middle of the city, but it goes around the city and it will stop at places which is convenient to people. So isn't that a much cheaper option which will not create a lot of difficulties for citizens and costs that are involved?
I'll just say something about the KCR. The KCR is that dashed black line that we see going around. Now, what has happened with over the years since the KCR was mothballed and sort of shut down is that the city of Karachi has grown beyond the limits of the KCR. When the KCR was active and functional, most of Karachi lived in this area. But what has happened is that you've got people living in Sujani and North Karachi and so on. It needs to be a part of the whole network, okay? Because one of the proposals was that these BRT lines, feeder lines, would bring people to the KCR stations and then they would circulate around rather than bringing all the buses to Numayish Chirangi as it does right now. So you're right, there is a need to see this thing in a holistic sort of way and consider that as well.
So the whole KCR, the city has grown, is not etched in stone. As the city grows, the routes for the KCR will be changed, circular railway.
Well, no, the circular railway has a track easement, right? So that exists. And in many places it's been encroached on. Okay? So that's one of the hurdles for the reviving of the KCR, that people have occupied some of those spaces. One proposal was to remove the tracks and use the easement to run more buses and just make a circular BRT line. I've heard that proposal as well. Nevertheless, there is this problem that in places the KCR has been encroached on. Now, what needs to happen is that you would retain this circle, but you might add other rings, provided that you had allowed for those in the development of the city and not plotted every square foot of land that's available to you. So that's the problem that we face. I mean, if you go to a city that is master planned like Beijing, you'll find that there is a ring road, and there's a second ring road, and the third ring road. I think there's 7 ring roads in Beijing. As it's grown, they just kept adding. So unless you have master planning, you're not going to have these things. Then you come back afterwards and you say, oh, now what do we do? And which is the case with DHA. They've gone phase after phase after phase without having an idea of how big this place was going to get. And now they're going to have unbelievable nightmares when the traffic gets fully realized, the traffic load. Imagine what defense is going to be like when phase 8 is fully filled out.
We have a question.
I'd just like to say a couple of more things. One is you are right. A lot of spurs have been planned from this ring, one's going up into North Karachi and stuff as a future thing. I don't know whether you've ever had a chance to see a video. There's a video that I saw of Bangkok where they had this train. It was an urban train. And what happened was there was a road there which people were walking and there were shops on either side, sort of makeshift sort of shops. And then suddenly there was this toot 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 of a horn. And people took this shade that they had in front of their shop, which was supported on 2 sticks. They picked up those sticks and pulled them back. People picked them up on both sides. People moved out of the road that they were thinking, and you suddenly noticed there was a railway track. And a train came through, going very slowly. And as it passed through, everybody went and put this back, and it was back to business as usual. This is a very famous video that's been on the internet for the last 10 years. Okay? So we are not the worst off. But coming back to your question, I think there's another thing we need to realize, that even if the KCR were to get functional today, it would not, the total number of what is called trips in a day this is the part of traffic planning, the total number of trips in a day, the KCR would not handle more than 2% of that. Would not handle more than 2% of the total trips taken in Karachi today.
Wow.
Now that might be amazing to you, but that is what it is. Do you know that where they have BRT systems in Asia, places like Delhi, Bangkok, Manila, the amount of trips, percentage of trips taken on this BRT system are generally 5% and 7% and numbers like that. So we've got to understand this whole thing. It's a much more complex problem than just saying, let's put in this system and hey presto, we're going to solve everything. It isn't that way. You've got to have all sorts of transport systems. You've got to have taxis and rickshaws and buses and mini buses and all sorts of things, private cars, private motorcycles. And all of them got to be one part of one large plan.
Yeah.
And as I said, in Karachi, we don't have any planning. We just have projects. We'll see a problem here, we'll say, let's go overpass it. Let's build an underpass. This is a busy road, somebody come and was making a part of a plan, let's put in this line. Let's put in that line.
Yeah. Next question.
I just wanted to know, the BRT lines that we see on the map here, how pedestrian friendly are they? And if I'm assuming much of these lines are going to be built around the ones that's currently in use in Lahore, and the ones in Lahore aren't really pedestrian friendly at all. So what's the background in that aspect?
Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing about the list I made of how people get around. One of the important ones is smoking.
Yeah.
You make a lot of them smoking. But the question is asking, Karachi is not a pedestrian city at all. No.
You know what I mean? No, it's not safe. And every opportunity we get, we reduce the width of the sidewalk. I mean, that's basically it. I think the BRTs, it'll make it harder for you to cross the street, but most of these streets are almost impossible to cross anyway. I mean, if you try to cross Sher Shah Suri Road that cuts through North Nazimabad, you can't do it unless you take your life into your hands. You do need a pedestrian cross, bridge across, and that'll be what will get you across with the BRT as well. But what needs to happen from a pedestrian point of view is you need to create sidewalks, because the sidewalks are going to feed the BRT system. For example, if you look at the green line, on either side of Sher Shah Suri Road is all of North Nazimabad, right? So how am I going to get, if I'm going to take the BRT, how am I going to get to my station? So you've got to figure out, either you will take your motorbike and drive to the station if it's too far, or you will take some other bus, or you will walk. If you walk, you want good sidewalks so that you don't fall off. You want to have some standards so that every curb is not a different height, ranging from 3 inches to 30 inches, which I've seen here. You want to make sure that it's safe, that it's pleasant, because you don't want some shade.
You need trees for that.
You need trees for that. If you are going to use motorbikes, then you need to provide parking for those motorbikes at the station, so that you can come in, you do a short hop from your house to the BRT station, you park your motorbike, you take the BRT, and you get to your place of work. That's the best thing to do. I mean, it's a lot better than driving all the way on your motorbike and running the risk of an accident, which seems to happen on a fairly regular basis on those roads. So, yeah, there's a lot of overall planning that needs to happen.
Not yet. Not as far as I know. Kabhi tak there's no jangla prepared. I mean, the jangla bus, the idea of it being this closed in, like in Lahore, so far I haven't.
Well, in order for it to be in order for it to be successful, you will need a jungla. You know, otherwise.
The number of people who get killed trying to cross the railway track. I think in Karachi there are probably 50 to 60 or 100 people killed every year.
And if Pakistan Railway was more healthy, you probably have more
I live in Block 13, Fidelby area, and I was looking forward to this because I work on Ayajunigar Road. So I was actually like you mentioned, okay, how you have to like get to the nearest spot. For instance, if I live in Fidelby area, Block 13, so I guess North Nadawad would be the closest one. But that the thing is, I used to use buses, and I believe they run on diesel, but and they would charge for that. Well, you could actually see a CNG kit right there. Okay? So what's the how can I be assured that this won't happen then? And the second thing is, for instance, if I have to go through I go through Karimabad, and I see 75% of the road being occupied by those encroachments. So don't we can't we first work on that, remove them, so we get some space on the road for the normal transport to work, because I think we have broad roads. And many times there are constantly if you have to take a U-turn, so half the road would be covered by garbage. Those kind of issues. I think if we work on that first, it would be kind of better for us to move on to them instead of working on these mega projects, because I think we already have something intact. And
mega projects makes for sound bites. Okay, you can get up there and say, I built this. Nobody will give you votes if you said, I cleaned up the street. You happen to live in one of the better planned parts of Karachi, Federal area, North Nazimabad. Very well planned. That's why there is room for this kind of infrastructure to be inserted into it. But you're right, if you cleaned up the roads, if you fixed the sidewalks, if you made the roads easier to maneuver, you wouldn't have traffic jams, you wouldn't have this sort of situation. But as Roland mentioned earlier, one of the bigger issues in Karachi is the lack of governance and rule of law. So that's where it is.
I would also like to point out something that Mr. Bilgrami here gave. He suggested that we have a transferable construction rights. This has been suggested, and it was included in the Karachi Building and Town Planning Regulations at one time. Yes, it was there for a while. Something must have not worked, because in a later amendment they took it out again. But in order to preserve heritage buildings, you need to give a lot of incentives. You need to forgive property taxes. You need to because otherwise people can't take advantage of their property like everybody else is doing. So what they're going to try to do is, one day they're going to come and take out one brick, and the next day they're going to come and take out another brick, and eventually the building is going to fall down on its own, and they're going to say, what can we do?
No, I'm gonna very, very categorically say it's not an option, because if you picked up all of old Karachi and moved it to Malir, it would not be a heritage district. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so one thing in conclusion, I would like to say that, sorry.
One more point. It's just out of context. We are talking about the project which is the result of urban sprawl. And of course, now just to solve this problem, we are going to high density areas. And high density areas like DHA Phase 8, I've just out of the context, I'm just sharing this information. I've come through a GIS information based on 30 years temperature rise data, and that says that the periphery of the town is worst affected, and the effect is 1 point. The comparative map of vegetation was there, and that has a clear story that of course the vegetation has gone from the periphery, and more gone in North Nadabad area, in Federal area, and all those. And those were the worst affected part. And similarly, the other factor is the wind blow. Your DHA is a heaven now at the moment, but once you have a high density area, the problem would be a nightmare living here.
DHA phase 8 is likely to be a high density area?
It's a waterfront area and a high density multi-storied building. That the project that has been seen in different.
There are a lot of projects being proposed in Fiji.
Don't tell anyone else that because I'm trying to sell a plot.
So in conclusion, thank you so much for coming here. I would just like to also say that I think, I teach law and I try to explain to all of my students and everyone I actually meet, is that all of us have a role to play within society, and which connects us to our governance aspect. Like, our governance will not work until we don't play our role and keep people accountable, to ask them as to why. Like, for example, when we're talking about billboards, like now PILAP has started an entire campaign in which we've contacted over 200 private companies who we have their advertisements on these illegal billboards on public properties. So from your Gul Ahmed to your McDonald's to Dil Pasand to everything. So it's about, supporting causes, and if you cannot play your own role, at least you can just let that zebra crossing, which is not actually a decoration on the road, it actually has a function. So until we do not recognize our own role within society and support causes like the T2F, which has allowed us to hold this space, this talk in this space. So at this stage, I would like to let you know that there is a donation box, which is located right next to that. So to allow, and we need to encourage people who are doing these things, so that if I'm able to do 10% on a personal level, if I can support like 5% for T2F and like 5% for HSP, we can come up with an entire framework where everyone plays their part. And with that, I would like to thank you again, and it was a real pleasure moderating this session. Thank you so much to all the panelists, and hopefully we will have another session on this at a later date.